The Morgan family's annual leadership summit was a polished display of old Southern wealth and legacy, held atop their Charlotte headquarters. A high rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the uptown skyline. It had been 7 years since I last stood in this building. I was 23 then, straight out of MIT with a master's in systems finance and operational architecture. That was also the day my application was denied by my uncle, Charles Morgan, in front of the entire board. Today I came back not as Sierra Morgan, the hopeful niece, but as the CEO of Solstice Dynamics, now the Morgan Group's biggest client, funneling $74 million a year through their transportation analytics division. They just didn't know the client was me. "The Q2 numbers are solid," said my cousin Brendan, clicking through his slick, overly polished slides. "A strong rebound, thanks mostly to our top partner." I knew that voice. 7 years ago, Brendan had leaned across the board table and told me, "You're bright, Sierra, but we can't hand over legacy roles to someone who wasn't groomed for this. Family structure matters." "Excellent overview," Uncle Charles chimed in now, nodding proudly. "This is why we keep strategy in trusted bloodlines." I lowered my eyes to the real-time financial dashboard on my tablet, data quietly pulled by an internal whistleblower I had hired 3 months ago. Brendan had been cooking the numbers, projections inflated, deficits hidden. If not for Solstice's contracts, the Morgan Group would be posting losses this year. "Ms. Morgan?" A soft voice interrupted. Charles's assistant, Camille, gesturing toward the boardroom doors. "They're ready for your presentation." I stood, smoothing the lapel of my charcoal gray suit. Tailored in Milan, a far cry from the clearance rack blazer I wore when they dismissed me. I stepped to the head of the table. Brendan squinted. "Sierra, what are you doing here? This is a closed strategy session." I met his gaze. "I'm here on behalf of Solstice Dynamics. We need to discuss our contracts before we even think about renewal." Silence. Charles frowned. "Solstice sends external reps, always has." I smiled. "They do. And this time, they sent their CEO." Brendan looked like he'd forgotten how to blink. My cousin Elise dropped her stylus. Recognition dawned like a slow, crushing tide. "That's not possible," Uncle Charles rasped. You run a niche data startup. We did full vetting." I tapped my tablet. A clean slide appeared on the wall mount screen. That startup was a shell. Solstice Dynamics, formerly Arsene Analytics, is mine. Dead silence. I've owned and led it for the past 7 years. The quiet was punctured by a sharp gasp. Just like that, the niece they once cast out had become the woman they now relied on for survival. The first slide sharpened into view. Audited financials. Solstice Dynamics' annual revenue nearly triple that of the Morgan Group. Regional? No, Solstice had a footprint in 14 countries. State-of-the-art R&D labs, logistics AI systems, and a client roster that included 11 Fortune 500 companies. I heard someone choke back a stunned breath. Brendan stood abruptly, face drained. "No, that's not. You can't be." "Can't be what?" I asked, voice unwavering. "The girl you laughed at during the internship dinner? The one who didn't fit the Morgan brand? Or the CEO of the company currently keeping your books from bleeding?" Murmurs erupted. Board members glanced at each other, unsettled. "We would have known," Brendan insisted. "Would you?" I arched an eyebrow. "The same way you knew about the $8,200,000 0 cents quietly rerouted through misclassified logistics inventory and false revenue projections?" Brendan's jaw dropped. Around him, whispers turned into sharp accusations. "I've spent the last 7 years building Solstice Dynamics into an international powerhouse," I continued. "While you toasted my absence, I became your foundation." Charles's hands clenched the chair arms, knuckles bone white. "Why now?" I advanced to the next slide, a breakdown of Morgan Group's dependence on Solstice. 81% of logistics revenue, 68% of client growth. Over half of all retained contracts ran through Solstice managed systems. "Because it's time to renegotiate," I said calmly. and based on what I've found, I'm not sure there's much worth saving. You can't just leave, Brendan snapped. The contracts renew in 5 business days, I said flatly. And as CEO, I'm raising serious concerns about Morgan Group's solvency. Your solvency, cousin? The boardroom exploded. Demands, accusations, frantic questions. Charles glared daggers at Brendan. Elise muttered something about federal audits. I remained exactly where I was, composed, unshaken, in control. Let the storm hit them first. I closed my tablet with a soft click. I'll be calling an emergency audit meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. I slid my notes into my briefcase. My team will present a full forensic breakdown of the Morgan Group's financial structure. The silence in the room grew tight. I suggest you show up prepared. This is revenge, Brendan blurted out, his voice cracking. Because we didn't give you a seat at the table? I paused in the doorway. The memory of that day 7 years ago still burned beneath my calm. His smug smirk, Uncle Charles's silence, Elise's scoff. The way they let me walk out like I didn't matter. My back straight, but my heart shattered. No, Brendan, I said, meeting his eyes, this isn't revenge. My voice stayed measured, cold. This is business, the very thing you all claimed I'd never understand. I checked my watch. 9 sharp, don't be late. I glanced back once more. Though punctuality never really ran in your side of the family, did it? Behind me, the room erupted. Raised voices, defensive excuses, Elise whispering furiously to someone on her left, Charles yelling Brendan's name. The illusion was breaking. At the elevator, my assistant Michael stood waiting with a bottle of sparkling water and a tablet already queued with tomorrow's report. How'd it go? He asked quietly. Exactly as planned, I said, stepping into the elevator. Then I looked into the camera lens on the tablet. If you thought that boardroom twist was satisfying, trust me, you don't want to miss what happens at tomorrow's audit. Hit subscribe, and I'll take you inside when everything finally crashes. I pressed the lobby button. Is everything ready for the morning? I asked. Full audit files, dependency maps, and Brendan's internal email trail, Michael replied, calm as ever. They're not going to see it coming. I thought of Uncle Charles's stunned face, Brendan's pale panic, the whispers from years ago claiming I didn't belong in the Morgan legacy, that I wasn't enough. Send me the final draft of the contract termination letter, I said. I want eyes on it tonight. You're pulling all of them? Michael asked. I smiled. Let's just say they'll finally understand what earned power looks like. The next morning, I arrived an hour early at Morgan Group headquarters. The same building that turned me away all those years ago. The security guard from back then stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. Miss Morgan, he stammered, voice filled with awe. Welcome back. He hesitated in the lobby. The board's already gathering upstairs. Early, I murmured, smirking. Funny how the scent of collapse sharpens instincts. As I stepped into the sleek executive elevator, the polished chrome reflected a woman they never expected. One they'd sidelined, now holding the pen that would write their fate. The boardroom was packed when I entered. A heavy silence blanketed the space. Uncle Charles sat at the head, his authority palpable but brittle. Brendan slouched beside the corporate attorneys, weighed down by tension and mounting denial. Independent directors whispered anxiously, scanning printed reports. Behind me, my team of analysts filtered in, hand-picked, embedded quietly over 5 years, collecting the data while the Morgan heirs played their legacy games. I stood at the podium. Good morning, I said smoothly. Shall we begin? Sierra, Charles said, voice stripped of its usual command. Before we proceed, perhaps a private word? I tilted my head slightly. I think we've had enough private family conversations, don't you? I nodded toward my team. Distribute the reports, please. The rustle of papers filled the room like a brewing storm. Gasps punctuated the silence. One director muttered under her breath, "This can't be right." "Those losses?" another whispered, flipping pages frantically. "They're accurate," I confirmed, pulling up the presentation. "Let's start with the creative accounting, shall we?" I fixed Brendan with a steady gaze. Would you like to explain how over $8 million in losses were buried under miscellaneous operational expenses? Is lawyer open to object, but I raised a hand. Or should we fast forward to the inflated client metrics, phantom assets, or the fact that without Solstice Dynamics contracts, Morgan Group is technically insolvent? You're trying to destroy us, Brendan hissed, voice breaking. No, Brendan, I replied calmly. You did that yourself, with your own family's help. He choked on the words. I arched an eyebrow. Family? You mean when you told half the industry I wasn't fit for leadership? Or when Uncle Charles laughed, saying I'd never understand real business? That was 7 years ago, Charles interjected too quickly. Yes, I said evenly, while you guarded old legacies, I built something new. I clicked to the next slide. The bar graph glowed clearly. 47% of your revenue depends directly on Solstice Dynamics. This revenue disappears next Monday if I terminate our contract. The room exploded into chaos. Voices overlapped, urgent and panicked. Chairs scraped harshly against the polished floor. Lawyers clustered in tense huddles. One board member actually cursed aloud. And then Brendan broke. I didn't want it to go this far, he muttered, sinking into his chair. You can't just pull out, Sierra. Charles rose, face flushed with fury. We'll take legal action. On what grounds? I asked, voice cold and steady. That your rejected niece outperformed your entire executive team? That your son's fraudulent reporting was uncovered before the SEC got involved? I leaned forward, eyes locked on Brendan. By all means, let your lawyers question him. I'd love for them to explain the off-book liabilities and phantom revenue streams. A gray-haired board member cleared his throat. Ms. Morgan, given these circumstances, we may need to discuss immediate leadership transitions. Leadership transitions? Brendan's voice cracked. This is our company, he spat. Actually, I said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table, not for long. Inside were 2 documents. Option 1, I said evenly. Morgan Group agrees to full restructuring. Brendan resigns. The board appoints independent leadership. We maintain a scaled-down partnership under strict oversight. And option 2, Charles asked quietly. A walkaway, I replied. Every contract terminated, and my legal team forwards our audit findings to federal regulators. I glanced at my watch. You have 1 hour. This isn't business, Brendan spat. It's revenge. No, cousin, I said quietly. It's exactly what you said business was, ruthless, merit-based, and only for those who can prove they belong. I gathered my tablet, notes, and silence. I'll be in the office. You once said I'd never deserve, I added quietly, the CEO's suite. Funny how things change. I left them behind, surrounded by reports, evidence, and rising panic. By the time I reached my private suite overlooking the Charlotte skyline, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Mom, how could you do this to your uncle? Dad, you're tearing the family apart. My cousins, you've ruined us. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened a dusty folder buried deep in my inbox, the rejection email Charles had sent me 7 years ago. Dear Sierra, while we admire your ambition, we feel you lack the leadership instincts required at Morgan Group. Perhaps a role with fewer responsibilities would better suit your strengths. I smiled and clicked archive. Sincerely, Charles Morgan. I printed the old rejection email and placed it on what would soon be my new desk. The board, now confronted with undeniable proof of Brendan's fraudulent reporting, faced only one rational path forward. Accept my terms, or lose everything. My son said it was done. Brendan resigned, his exit as quiet as it was long overdue. Charles, stripped of his influence, was pressured into an early retirement no one in the room dared contest. And Morgan Group, once a fortress of nepotism and old money pride, would now be restructured under my oversight. The family empire that once declared I wasn't fit to join would now report to me. Michael appeared just as the final papers were signed, a bottle of chilled champagne in hand. Congratulations, he said with a grin, on your very elegant takeover. Not a takeover, I replied, watching through the window as Brendan and Charles quietly packed their offices into cardboard boxes. Just business. The kind they said I'd never understand. My phone buzzed again, dozens of unread messages. Mom, you didn't have to humiliate them. Dad, this isn't how family handles conflict. Cousins, we grew up together. How could you? I typed one reply to the family group chat and hit send. Don't worry about the family name. Morgan Group is finally in qualified hands. Then I set the phone down and turned back to the window, watching the Charlotte skyline glow as the sun sank low. New kind of peace settled over me. Not the peace of approval or recognition, but the clarity of earned power. Because sometimes success isn't about getting the job you begged for. It's about building something so undeniable that they're forced to sit across the table and negotiate with you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming their boss. Charles had been right about one thing, though. I wasn't qualified to work at Morgan Group. I was qualified to own it. Hey, before we dive into anything else, how was your day, really? I know we don't always ask that, especially in a world moving this fast, but I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments. Good, bad, somewhere in between. I'm listening. Because sometimes, just being heard is the first step to feeling seen. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Not just for hearing my story, but for walking through every hard-earned lesson with me. When I was told I wasn't good enough to sit at their table, I didn't fight for a seat. I built my own table. And eventually, they had no choice but to stand around mine. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, overlooked, or shut out by people who were supposed to believe in you? Tell me how you kept going anyway. Or tell me where you are now, and I'll cheer you on like no one else did. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that quiet strength makes the loudest impact. If any part of this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Not just to support me, but to support yourself. Because stories like this aren't just about revenge or power plays. They're about finding your voice, honoring your worth, and rewriting your place in the world. Here's what I know now. You don't need permission to begin. You don't need approval to grow. And you definitely don't need anyone's blessing to become who you were always meant to be. So go ahead, archive that rejection. Failed what they said you couldn't. And when they finally recognize you, make sure it's because you refused to disappear. Until then, I'll be right here, sharing stories like mine and waiting to hear yours. Because sometimes the best success story starts with a no. You turned it into power. If you've walked with me through this journey, I want you to know how much your support means. Not just to me, but to everyone who's ever been underestimated or overlooked. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your own stories, or even just a word of encouragement. Drop a comment below and let's build a space where we lift each other up. Tell me, have you ever faced a moment when people doubted you? How did you push through? Your voice matters here as much as mine. Life has taught me that setbacks aren't the end. They're the fuel for something greater. When they told me I didn't belong, I didn't argue. I created my own path. My advice to you is simple but powerful. Don't wait for permission to chase your dreams. Don't let anyone else define your worth or your future. Whether it's in your career, your relationships, or your passions, build your own table, stand tall, and invite others to join you on your terms. Real strength comes from believing in yourself when no one else does. So, share your wisdom, ask questions, or just say hello in the comments. Let's inspire each other to rise beyond the doubts and redefine what success truly means. Together, we're unstoppable.